The cavern had been silent for centuries, a place abandoned even by the bravest explorers. Yet, as the human stepped into the cold darkness, his footsteps echoed like a heartbeat, awakening something long forgotten. Dust drifted in the stale air, and ancient symbols carved into the stone walls pulsed faintly, as though reacting to his presence. He followed the whisper of a legend, one that spoke of a being hidden away for 200 years, locked in a stone prison for reasons no historical record dared explain. The deeper he went, the more the air thickened until he found her. A colossal figure kneeling in the shadows, limbs bound with ancient chains, hair cascading like tangled vines, and eyes sealed shut with glowing runes that whispered warnings of their own. Every instinct in him screamed to run, yet something about her posture, broken, exhausted, and painfully human, rooted him to the spot. When he stepped closer, the ground trembled softly beneath her weight, and for the first time in 2 centuries, she moved. Her head tilted ever so slightly, as if sensing warmth after generations of darkness. Then in a voice so faint it barely reached him, she whispered the first words she had spoken since her imprisonment. "Tell me, do I still look human?" The question struck him harder than any monster, any legend, any myth. It wasn't a creature seeking fear, it was a soul begging for truth. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't discovered a monster sealed away in a forgotten cavern. He had found a woman punished for becoming something she never wanted to be, trapped between worlds, desperate for someone, anyone, to see her as more than the giantess she had become. The human's lantern flickered as he entered the abandoned cavern, illuminating carvings far older than any civilization he knew. The legends had spoken of a colossal sleeper, but nothing prepared him for what he saw. In the heart of the cavern, half buried in stone and dust, knelt the giantess. Her form massive, yet undeniably human in shape, as though a woman had been stretched and frozen in a nightmare. Thick chains wrapped around her limbs, glowing faintly with runes that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Her hair spilled across the ground like a tapestry of shadows, and her sealed eyes bore symbols that flickered with an eerie light. He approached cautiously, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against his chest. Suddenly her head shifted, stone cracking beneath her chin as she moved for the first time in 200 years. And then came her whisper, aching and fragile. "Do I still look human?" In that single trembling question, he felt her loneliness, her fear, and the terrible truth. She wasn't a monster, but a forgotten soul begging to be seen. The cavern trembled gently as the giantess stirred, each movement sending small tremors through the stone beneath them. The human steadied himself, gripping the lantern as he tried to process the impossible sight before him. Her sealed eyes fluttered beneath the glowing runes, as though trying to open but restrained by ancient magic. "Who are you?" she murmured, her voice echoing like distant thunder softened by sorrow. He introduced himself quietly, unsure if she would lash out or crumble. Instead, she bowed her head slightly, a gesture almost painfully delicate for someone of her size. She explained that she remembered nothing after the ritual that sealed her away. Only darkness, silence, and dreams of being watched by 100 unseen eyes. As she spoke, cracks began to crawl along the chains binding her arms, responding to her rising awareness. The human realized that his presence had triggered something, some ancient mechanism that recognized her awakening, and with every second, she seemed less like a myth and more like a forgotten person waking from a nightmare. When the giantess gathered her words, her voice trembled with memories long buried under stone. She had once been a healer, a woman beloved in her village, known for restoring life where death tried to take root. But greed from those in power twisted her gifts into a weapon. They demanded she grow stronger, larger, more powerful. A ritual meant to enhance her abilities spiraled out of control, transforming her into a giantess whose size frightened even those she had once saved. Terrified of what she might become, the leaders sealed her away, for the good of the land, telling the world she had become a monster. The human listened in stunned silence, realizing she had been punished not for a crime, but for her unwilling transformation. "I never wanted this," she whispered, fingers scraping the stone. "I only wanted to help." For the first time, he saw not a giantess or a legend, but a woman imprisoned for a mistake she didn't choose. The human stepped closer, ignoring the instinctive fear that screamed at him to run. Instead, he reached out and placed his hand on one of her giant fingers, the skin warm and trembling under centuries of neglect. She flinched at the touch, unused to kindness, unused to being treated as anything other than a threat. "You deserved better," he said softly. The words cracked something inside her far deeper than the chains binding her. She told him that no one had touched her with gentleness since before the transformation, that she had forgotten what simple comfort felt like. The runes sealing her eyes flickered again, glowing brighter, as if responding to emotion. The cavern walls vibrated, shedding dust and ancient debris. "If I free you," he asked, "will you trust me?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If you truly see me as human," she whispered, "then I will." In that fragile moment, a bond formed, one built not on fear, but on the simple belief that even cursed souls deserve compassion. The runes around her wrists shimmered like molten gold as the human studied them, searching for a weakness. He traced the symbols, and each time he touched one, the chain vibrated, reacting not to strength, but intention. "These were made to bind the heart, not the body," she murmured, recognizing the magic she once practiced. "Only someone who sees me as I was, not as I became, can break them." He swallowed hard and placed both hands on the first rune. Warmth surged through him, followed by a sudden pulse of energy that nearly drove him to his knees. The chain cracked. The giantess gasped, feeling power return to her limb for the first time in centuries. Encouraged, he moved to the next symbol, repeating the action, each time weakening the ancient magic. With a final push, the last chain shattered, sending a wave of energy rippling through the cavern. The giantess lifted her arm, slowly, shakily, but freely, and for the first time in 200 years, she smiled. The most frightening part remained, the glowing seals over her eyes. "These aren't chains," she explained softly. "They're warnings. Anyone who looks upon what I became might fear me again." But the human stepped closer, refusing to show hesitation. "Let me see you," he said gently. She trembled. "What if I'm not human anymore?" Slowly, he reached up to the first rune on her eyelid. The moment he touched it, a surge of emotion, fear, sadness, hope, washed over him all at once. The rune cracked, then dissolved into faint light. He moved to the second, then the third, until the seals faded completely. The giantess inhaled sharply as her eyes opened for the first time in centuries. They were not monstrous, not corrupted, not twisted. They were soft, human, filled with pain and longing. Tears, massive, shimmering, welled up as she whispered, "You still see me." And he nodded. "I always did." Together they left the cavern, the giantess moving slowly, each step uncertain as her massive form adjusted to the open air. Sunlight touched her skin for the first time in 2 centuries, making her gasp in wonder. The wind brushed her face like an old friend, and birds circled curiously above her, as though welcoming her return. The human guided her, describing the changes in the world she once knew. Lands reshaped, kingdoms fallen, myths rewritten. She listened quietly, learning how time had erased her existence from history. "They forgot me," she whispered as they reached a cliff overlooking vast forests. "But you didn't." He shook his head gently. "I came because I believed the legend was wrong." She smiled sadly. "And what do you believe now?" He looked at her, truly looked, and said, "That you were never a monster. Just someone punished for becoming something she couldn't control." For the first time, she believed it too. As night settled over the land, the giantess lay beneath the stars, marveling at a sky she thought she would never see again. The human sat beside her enormous hand, talking to her as though she were no different than anyone else. She confessed her fears, that people might still reject her, that her presence might bring destruction, that she no longer knew where she belonged. "Then stay with me," he offered, "until you decide." She stared at him, eyes shimmering. No one had ever given her a choice before. Slowly, she nodded. Then, I will walk with you, for as long as I'm allowed. And so, the two began their journey, an impossible pair bound not by fate, but by trust, and the belief that humanity is not defined by size or shape, but by the heart. Her story, once buried beneath stone and fear, would now be rewritten, not as a monster, but as a woman reclaiming her place in a world that had forgotten her. Quinn the End, the human realized that he hadn't just freed a giantess from stone. He had freed a forgotten heart from centuries of silence. And she, in turn, learned that humanity isn't measured by height or form, but by the courage to trust someone after a lifetime of betrayal. Together they walked into a world that once feared her, not as monster and savior, but as two souls rebuilding a future neither thought they deserved. Maybe the world would accept her, maybe it wouldn't. But for the first time in 200 years, she had hope. A name, a voice, a choice. And as she stepped forward, the earth trembling beneath her feet, her whisper carried into the night like a promise reborn. This time, I will live. Some legends are meant to awaken, and hers had only just begun.